Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is December 11th, 2023, and today's webinar is How to Master Grant Strategy, Calendars, and Teams, presented by Diane Leonard. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. The materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. The terms permit you to use the sites for your personal non-commercial use only. You may print or save copies of the sites solely for your personal non-commercial use. You may not distribute, transfer, transmit, copy, upload, download, post, publish, display, perform, modify, or otherwise create derivative works from any of the materials without the Seminole Tribe's prior written consent. And now I'm going to show you how to interact how to use the platform. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see a hand. With that hand, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. You have below, you have a box that says files. Here you will find any handouts or any items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second box labeled web links is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to join our email list and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate with the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Know that most can be solved by exiting and re-entering the meeting room. Let's all try out the chat box together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, and your tribal affiliation. And today's webinar is being recorded. It is now with a great pleasure that I introduce Diane Leonard.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me for How to Master Grant Calendars, Grant Strategy, and Grant Teams. These three things, when combined, can make your grant-seeking efforts into not just a successful grant-seeking effort, but a really sustainable and highly competitive grant-seeking effort by your organization. So really thrilled to have all of you joining us today. I have just typed into the chat box where it is that I'm joining from today. I'm in far, far, far upstate New York in the Thousand Islands region. No snow here today, actually, unseasonably warm. And so I see we've got folks joining from a number of places around the country as well. So thrilled to be with you. And for those who haven't been in one of the webinars I've delivered, just a tiny bit about me. I have been in the grant sector my entire career, first as a grant maker, and then the past 20 plus years as a grant seeker. And through our work at D.H. Leonard Consulting, we turned 19 in January. And actually, I love it. We just got an award email today. And so it's now over $121 million raised for our clients. And I attribute that success to, yes, strong writing, but also the work of each client organization that we support in terms of thinking about their strategy and planning and the team effort that it takes for grants to be successful. One teeny tiny other little tidbit about me, the way that I fuel my grant writing work, focus on not getting burned out in this field, is by running, or this time of year, indoor cycling, each and every day, and then one good cup of freshly ground brewed coffee. And so both of those things have happened today, and I'm hoping that whatever is fueling your work is also in place as we get started with this particular work week. If you'd like to answer in the chat box what is fueling your work today, certainly would love to hear about that, but totally optional. Now, as you can see on your screen, we have our agenda for today laid out. We are going to talk about forming a grant team. We're going to look at tools that can help us with our team, how it is throughout the application process that we can engage different colleagues in the process along the way, and we'll look at facilitation techniques related to grant teams. There will be a formal Q&A at the end. I want to make sure that I get all of your big picture questions answered that you may have brought to today's session. But at any time, the chat box where you have let us know where you're joining from today, and perhaps you're typing in what's fueling your work, at any time, you can type a question into the chat box. I want to pause along the way and ensure that we're getting your questions answered in the moment instead of asking you to hold them in a parking lot. I also do want to call out that if you've not been in a session with me before, I have a strong tendency to ask questions to check in with you in terms of your experiences, your understanding. When I do so, it is completely optional to type back into the chat box. Helps me know how you're thinking, what you're feeling, and to maybe customize some of the next conversation, but it is optional. I know that doesn't necessarily serve everyone in their learning style, so please don't feel that you have to, but I do welcome you to do so. Oh, Basla, I'm sorry to hear that you have a cough today, but the ginger tea still does sound delightful. I switched tea as soon as I get done with that first cup of coffee. So chai tea will be fueling my post-webinar work today. So we've got a full agenda ahead of us. And again, as Oysta said, in the files for the platform, you can find the handouts from today as a PDF. And then our grant research guidebook, which is also available, is part of how you can facilitate what we're going to look at later on in today's session. So forming a grant team. Within the grant seeking field, whether individuals call themselves a grant writer, a grant professional, a nonprofit professional that sometimes writes grants, regardless of title, or a preferred way to describe your interactions with grants, what has become widely accepted is that grant seeking is not a solo sport. It is rather, it's a team sport. And grant teams truly are what make a difference for organizations being competitive in single applications, but also over a longer period of time. So what I thought would be helpful is to give you a definition of a grant team. And then once I have defined what a grant team is in our space, then I'd like for you to let me know if you have a grant team in place or not. So here's what a grant team is broadly defined as in our field. If you Google it, this is probably the sort of definition you'll find. If you go to the dictionary website, unlikely to find anything. So a grant team is a group of colleagues in an organization that have a stake in creating competitive grant applications, in seeing grants be successful in getting the application in on time, being successful in receiving funds, being successful in implementing the awarded funds. A grant team is a really flexible definition. It's a group of colleagues that could be coming together formally every month in person or every other month via Zoom, or it could be a group of colleagues that come together on an ad hoc basis as needed during the year to talk about specific large applications. So there's a fair amount of flexibility for what a grant team looks like, and across our entire client roster, grant teams look a little bit different in each and every one of our client organizations, but all of them have a grant team where their colleagues are thinking about how to be successful together. So what I'm wondering is, given the broad and flexible definition that I've given you about a grant team, understanding that it's our belief and our recommendation that a grant team, this engaged group of colleagues, is critical to your overall successful and sustainable grant seeking, let me know in the chat box why for yes and for no. Question mark if you're not really sure, if you want to think about it some more. But do you have a grant team in process in your organization? Is there one that exists? You don't have to call it a grant team. That is far from the requirement. It doesn't have to have a name, doesn't have to be on an org chart, but Y for yes, N for no, question mark for maybe, I'm not sure, I want to think about it some more. Go ahead and let me know in the chat box. And there is no judgment on your answer. Absolutely none. The point of talking about it today is to help think about ways that either one, you could implement this idea into your organization, or two, how you can strengthen it as you maybe look at the next calendar year. Our grant teams, as I mentioned, and part of why I highlight that each of our clients in our team here with DH Leonard Consulting, each of our clients have a slightly different approach to what a grant team is. There is not a one size fits all way that this gets implemented. They are very unique to what the organizational culture looks like, the organizational structure that you might see on an organizational chart, the reporting structure to a senior leadership group. Okay, and I see we've got a mix of your experiences in terms of this grant team concept. Some of you, this is something maybe you're looking to implement in the new year. For others, you'll be probably listening for some ways that you could enhance this idea in the next year. Don't forget, all questions are welcome in the chat box at any time. But especially since some of you have grant teams, I welcome not only questions, I welcome comments. I welcome your experiences, because each of your organizations is another unique way that a grant team has been implemented. And so if you have any feedback on what has worked well in your organizations or what you've experienced and learned, by all means, please do feel free to share that with the rest of us in the chat box as well. I think that would be really helpful for some sharing to happen in that space. Well, now that we understand what a grant team is, we have some shared understanding. Why don't we talk about how to form a grant team? For those of you that don't have a grant team, these are your potential homework steps that you might follow, perhaps starting in January. For those of you that do have a grant team, please don't walk away for a minute. I want you to think about these steps for ways that you could potentially strengthen your grant team. So our first step, our team loves to have numbered step processes. It helps us to ensure that we're following repeatable processes based on our past successes, the best practices that we're seeing. So we have some steps here for you to follow in terms of forming a grant team. The first is that we want to think about what our big picture plan is here. Our goal is to have a group of colleagues that have a stake in seeing grants be successful. But what do we want that to look like? We're working on an initial hypothesis here. Do we think that we want to meet monthly? Do we think that we want to have a group that sets the strategy for the year and kind of our priorities for the year? And then maybe we have a different team, maybe a little bit of overlap that deals with like the actual application work and checking in on that. Depending on your organization size, that might help give some direction for whether we're going to have a higher level leadership strategy team that looks at what are we going to do for the year, and then a different implementation team, or maybe they're one and the same. Again, no one perfect answer, but think about what your working first hypothesis is. What do we think we want it to look like? Once we have that in place, then we can look at, well, who in our organization is already engaged? Because now we would have some specifics about what we were asking them to participate in. We would be asking these colleagues, maybe it's someone from finance who's already providing information for grant applications and grant reports. Maybe it's someone with program services who's already giving information for logic models and narrative questions. When we approach them in the second step, to see if they are willing to be part of our grant team, we would be able to tell them that we are thinking we're going to meet every month. And we're thinking there's going to be a leadership team that looks at strategy once a year, and then we're going to focus on the big applications together and maybe check in every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks. So we're making a more specific ask so that they can understand what it means to be part of this grant team. Again, formal, informal, maybe called something different than a grant team, also okay. So we identify those engaged colleagues. And they say, oh, yeah, sure. Whether there are morning bagels and coffee available or not, I'm guessing that they're going to be supportive of this idea because they're already engaged in the process with you. The third step is where things might slow down a little bit. We need to think about which roles are not represented in this initial draft of a grant team. We want to think about what skills, what areas of expertise, which passion areas do we want to have represented within our grant team. Do we have someone who loves to talk about budgets, who can help us with that information from finance? Do we have someone who could speak for the leadership voice within the organization? Do we have someone who can speak about programs and about the survey tools we might be using? Do we have someone represented, whether ourselves or another colleague, who perhaps love talking about logic models? What we're really trying to do in this step is to build our dream team. What is our ideal dream team? I've got the superheroes picture here, but what are the different skills and roles and passions that we want to have represented in our grant team? This chart here, not nearly as fun as a photo of some superheroes, but it gives us some ideas for the different types of titles and roles that we might see fulfilling some of the key activities that are very common in grant teams, especially as we start to talk about larger grant applications. For smaller foundation type grant applications, we might find that our grant teams could be a little bit smaller, but the larger the application, the more likely that we are going to have as many roles and responsibilities listed on this screen as possible involved in the project. Because those large grants, especially those large federal grants, they take a lot of specialized knowledge in order to write them successfully and implement them successfully. So we want to make sure we don't leave anyone out. Now, for those of you who do have a grant team in process, I would love to know, in addition to someone from program and someone from finance, who have you successfully engaged in your grant team? If you could just generally share in terms of their role. Is it that you found quality assurance and the evaluation department, the data department to be helpful? Is it that you were surprised but excited to have HR be a part of it? Was it marketing and outreach that was really effective for you, or IT? If there's anything about the role beyond the more traditionally expected writer, program, finance that you found to be successful, that would be fantastic if you could share that for us in the chat box. So we identify these folks that we'd love to have involved, but who's going to make the ask? We're not asking for them to start leading grant applications. We're asking for them to have a voice at the table some of the time when appropriate for applications. And so you might say, oh, I can absolutely ask these folks to occasionally be a part of our grant team when appropriate because they do have a stake in seeing grants be successful. But in other organizations, it's been our experience, in particular in my mind right now, I have a very large healthcare system that we work with, where it was not going to be the grant professional leading the grant team who would make the asks, but rather it was going to be the CEO of the healthcare system who made the asks to say, dear colleagues, I would ask you to consider being a part of this grant team. So depending on your organization, right, maybe you'll make the asks yourself, or perhaps you'll let someone in leadership make the ask on your behalf. Now, what is the perfect size for a grant team? Well, I think that Jeff Bezos has it right in terms of thinking about the number of people that you can serve with a pizza. And that's probably a pretty good judge whether you're going to be eating pizza as a team or not. If your grant team is growing such that you'd need to order a second pizza in order for folks to feel fulfilled with the meal, you might have too many cooks in the grant kitchen. You might have too many people on your grant team. So I would encourage you to not worry about having a huge grant team, rather a team that maybe you could feed with a single pizza. And also, it's okay if some of those members are not always present. I'm thinking about, in particular, like human resources. One of our clients, they call that department, they call them the people's team. Well, that group is really important, especially when it comes to government grants for that particular client, because job descriptions and CVs or resumes are commonly being required as attachments in those large government grants, and those have to come from the people's team or from HR. But in many of the foundation grants that organization does, those are not as common of an attachment. And so maybe we describe a little bit about a person's bio, but not so much about their formal responsibilities per the job description. So they don't need to be a part of all grant team conversations, but they're part of some of those larger grant team conversations, figuring out where in the application timeline are they going to be part of the conversation. So it's a pretty flexible definition of who's on the team and when from what we're seeing in our client organization. So I share that so that you approach this definition of a grant team with what we like to call rigid flexibility. We like to have the grant team, but we want to have a lot of flexibility about how best to engage our colleagues to reach that shared goal. If you have any questions about this broad idea of a grant team, I'd love to hear them so that we can make sure that they get addressed. Feel free to type those into the chat box for me now. And I know typing in those questions can always take a moment. Feel free also to use at the very top of your platform, you could certainly raise your hand if you want to ask a question that way. What I'd like to move into as you're thinking about your broader grant team questions or what that might look like in your organization, I realized that we did not put a toolbox on your things to bring to today's webinar. I get it. It's more of an imaginary toolbox for us. But if we're thinking about being a grant writer, a grant professional, the person who's helping to lead grants for our organization, the reality is we have quite a large toolbox that we carry around each and every day. Because we're using different platforms, we are collaborating across different departments or maybe across different organizations, not to mention all the facilitation type tools that we might have in our toolbox. What I want to think about first, though, is the tools that you use for drafting and communicating with your grant team. So you're right, I've got some more numbered steps. And what I would ask is that you share with me your answers to each of these questions in the chat box. So the first one is to let us know, is your team co-located, so you are all in one shared office, or are you in a variety of locations? Go ahead and let us know if you're a co-located team or if you are a dispersed team, if you are a virtual or a hybrid team. That's the first thing that we want to consider when we look at how are we going to facilitate this grant team to be as effective as possible. So if you're willing to share that answer to step 1, variety, or you could say dispersed or hybrid, or are we all together? Are we co-located? Okay, we've already got a few of the dispersed, so working from a variety of locations. I see also, though, we do have some folks that are all in one place together. Good. No right or wrong answer, no right or wrong indicator of a grant team that's going to be successful, but this is certainly going to influence what you consider in your next steps. It's certainly one thing to all be in an office, whether in cubicles or offices where you can walk around and see each other, check in throughout the day. I remember being in one of those more corporate office buildings, and I was like looking for a signature or looking for input from somebody in leadership. I could walk to their office and see, are they there? Do they have a sticky note on the door? They're out for an appointment, right? It was a different way that I could think about our communication. I've been running a remote team for nearly 19 years. I can't walk to anyone's office. It's a really long walk from the Thousand Islands to even the closest team member's office in a different part of New York State. Nope, not going to be able to walk to their office. So we've got to think about how we'll communicate in a different way. So that's why we have to think about step 2. Because even in today's day and age, even if you're all located in one space, it's very likely that there is some sort of document data management that's happening that is electronic, be it your server, a VPN server, or some sort of cloud-based system. If you could please let me know. I've just put up a few different types of software that are used in terms of putting your organization's documents in one place. So the second thing to consider is what tool or tools does your organization already use for sharing, storing, and protecting your documents? Please go ahead and let me know in the chat box so that I can see the delineation here in your answers. I've put a little double asterisk there so I can see the different answers to your steps. What are the tools or the single tool that you rely on for sharing documents or collaborating with your colleagues? Again, a wide range of answers that I might expect here. There's no one perfect right answer. OneDrive, okay, a drive that your IT folks have. SharePoint, yep. Google Drive, okay, yep. Like I said, no right or wrong, but these tools, well, I've been in the field long enough. I remember when, right, our computers didn't have a lot of storage, and I had piles and piles of file drawers in my office where we were keeping records. But the fact that we can now have everything easily accessible per our own organization's IT standards so that there isn't siloed information, rather maybe potentially protected information related to client data or salary data, certainly. But for the narratives related to our applications, for our attachments that we're collaborating on together, the tools that you've typed into the chat box are going to make the work for our grant team more seamless, more efficient, and more effective instead of trying to only email around attachments and worrying about version control. So great, now what? Well, you have shared some different tools that are being used in your organization. And so the third step that I ask you to consider is how many clicks would it take for a member of your grant team to get to an application that they're collaborating with you on? So perhaps it looks like most of you answered a single tool, so you don't have to worry about which tool might be the easiest for folks to access. Sometimes we hear that people are using multiple systems. It seems like most of you are using a single mechanism for how you're storing and sharing your data with each other and your documents. The question I'd like to ask you here related to step 3 is, if you think about an application or a piece of an application that you'd be asking for someone to support you on, how many clicks would it take for them to get to that document? You might say, oh, wow, I'm not sure. I'd have to, let me go click through and count. But if you have an idea of how many clicks it would take for someone to get into part of your grant application where you want their support, look at that. We already have responses coming in, and they're actually about the same, that it would take probably 4 to 5 clicks for folks to get to where they need to be. So we have to think about our grant team and that they're folks that are supporting grants sometimes. They're not always thinking about grants. They certainly want to see grants be successful per our definition, but we want to make things as simple and direct for our grant team as possible. So totally optional homework, but what I encourage you to do is pretend that you are a grant team member. Finance, program, HR, data and evaluation. Someone that has been asked to provide information. How can you get them to that spot where you want them to provide the information in fewer clicks? So for those of you that answered 4 to 5, my optional challenging homework for you is to see if you can get it to be 3 to 4 or 2 to 3. What are the ways that you can structure your information so that you can make it easier for individuals to get to what you're asking? So one way that we've done this within our organization is that we use something called a project digest. And the project digest is for an application. It has the link out to every document, whether a narrative, a budget, an attachment piece, but it is a single document that never changes in the life of the application within the digital structure. And so it can be bookmarked so that it is one click to get to the bookmarked document, and it is a second click to get into whatever document they are being asked to support. Now, if you can get something that is a one click, I'm all about it. Could they bookmark the actual document or put it in their starred within Drive, right? Save it in their SharePoint so that it's one of their favorite items? Sure. But I share that Project Digest example as a way that I think potentially you could think about how can we get to fewer clicks. That is not like a secret sauce, right? It's just a simplified document sharing structure to make it as easy as possible for our grant team members to help us have grants be successful. So again, totally optional homework. It's not like you have to report back to me. Your homework is not due on a specific day, but I think that that's a really helpful challenge to make things easier for your grant team members. Now, this last one is not necessarily about getting the applications out the door or having the funding be implemented. Rather, this is about how we disseminate information about our grant seeking progress, our grant seeking successes. And so I'm wondering how many of you share some sort of dashboard or report related to your grant seeking efforts with some group of stakeholders. I've been pretty broad in how I've defined this. So you share some sort of report. It could be Excel, or maybe some sort of dashboard, something that shows progress on your grant seeking success. And who you share it with, well, I've not defined that as the key piece here either. It could be development, organizational leadership, a board of directors, but let me know with a Y for yes and N for no if you are providing some sort of semi-regular update, or perhaps more frequent, some sort of update about your grant seeking progress. I've tried to be really broad about it so that you consider as many options as possible. I see that a few of you all are already doing this. The reason I'm super broad about it is that it's often defined by the desire for visibility from leadership or a board of directors, but they have very different ways that they ask to see it. For those of you that do not currently have something like this in place, I do encourage you to not start from scratch on your own, but rather start by asking, what is important about our goal? Is it about how much money we raise, how many new funders we connect with, how many grants we renew each year? Make sure you understand what metrics are most important to your stakeholders, to your leadership, to your board, so that you can create some form of visual report that helps them best understand the metrics that they want to use to define grant seeking success. Having that visual communication available will ensure that everyone is aware of the awesome work that the grant team is doing together in a way that is most meaningful for them. It doesn't have to be a huge 10-page report, not even a 5-page report. I am a huge fan of single-page visual dashboards, as simple as possible, but something that helps to highlight your success. So let's think about our grant team, shall we? Some of you have a team in place, others are looking to build a team. When we think about how we can engage our team, I think this is a delightful thing. There are many ways that we can engage our colleagues in the process. I think you're probably picking up on the fact that this whole grant team idea is really unique to each and every organization. And this section is going to highlight not just how it's different from one organization to the next, but how the engagement in a grant team is different from one colleague to the next. So when we think about how to engage our colleagues in a grant team, I have a few very specific examples of how you could engage them that I'm going to share as we walk through this section. But I'm wondering, you're here. That to me indicates you're probably one of the people that help to write applications, if not lead the application in your organization. What are some of the ways that you find you get input from others in your organization? If you'd be willing to share that in the chat box, that would be fantastic. What are some of the ways that you currently, right now, have success getting input from your colleagues? How are they supporting the grant application process? If you'd like to take a moment and type that into the chat box, that would be fantastic. What are the ways in which currently your colleagues are helping in some way? You get to define what the some way is. How are your colleagues helping right now related to the grant team process? As we look at the 5 items on the screen, I think these are some of, I want to say easy wins. These are some of the most likely places where you might be able to get colleague input, but there are certainly far more ways than what I've even defined here. So let's walk through them and think about what might work best for you. So the first idea is to have a grant calendar. The grant calendar is meant to help us understand as an organization, how are we going to go from these big goals? We want to raise $1 million in grant revenue. We want to renew 75% of our current funding and five new funding opportunities to apply to. We want to secure $250,000 in foundation grants and $50,000 in government grants this year. Those could be the goals that you're working towards. The grant team is the visualization of our plan for how we will achieve those goals. So having some or all of our grant team members be a part of this process helps to ensure that we have buy-in from our colleagues. Yes, we want to apply for that. Yes, we can put the agency organizational resources towards these applications. Yes, we agree that it is a priority to get funding for fill in the blank. The hot meal delivery program, the after-school tutoring program, the planning work that's necessary for the restoration of this building. Whatever it is that your organization is focusing on, your grant calendar should be a visual representation of those grant priorities, of those grant-seeking efforts. Now, does it have to be a physical calendar? Like, I actually have still a wall calendar. It's more because it has pictures of family and friends on it, but I'm not saying that it has to be an actual physical calendar. In fact, especially given the fact that many of you are in a variety of locations distributed from your team, it's more likely that it is some form of digital calendar. Now, the digital calendar, does it matter what tool it's in? Absolutely not. What matters is that other colleagues have access. And I'm going to show you a way that visually we can create this calendar together. But first, why would it be important to have a calendar that perhaps others in the organization might understand, and definitely that others in the organization have access to, could see? Well, there's 2 key reasons here. One, it happens. People get sick unexpectedly and they're not around, whether it's just for a few days or for a longer period of time. And so if your grant calendar is not accessible to multiple members of the team, you as an organization have a risk that you might miss a key report or application deadline. Now, to go on the other positive contact for that idea. Why is a grant calendar important? Why should it be visible to more than just yourself? I mean, what if you won the Powerball? You might be like, I'm gone, at least for a very long vacation for the next few months. See you later. And so worrying about grant reports and deadlines just might not be top of mind for you. For whatever reason, we might not always be available, and we want to ensure that our organization doesn't have an whoops type moment related to reports or deadlines. So having things be transparent and visible to at least 2 people, ideally more, within the grant team ensures that you have continuity and that you don't miss key items. Now, one of my favorite ways to do a grant calendar is actually a visual exercise that involves everybody. So I love calendaring and paying attention to who's where when. I actually find it to be like a de-stressing exercise for me to feel like, okay, we've got everything covered, and also to see like what's the plan for the week. But when we think about a grant calendar, it's pretty flat, pretty 2D, and I'll say it, boring if we look at an Excel list of our deadlines, or if we look at a Google Calendar or an Outlook printout of our shared grant calendar that a lot of teams will create. It's helpful to make sure that we don't miss a deadline, but it doesn't give us any sense of the relative scale of the work. And it doesn't feel like it's malleable, like we can play with the plan and try to make any changes. So, what I'm going to show you here are some steps that you could take, again, optional homework, to try and lay out a grant calendar. Now, I'm showing this to you using virtual sticky notes, and you can do the same thing. There are 2 different tools that you can use. They have free boards available. One is called Miro. Just put that link in the chat box for you. The second is called Mural. I've put that in the chat box as well. And there's some other project management tools that now have like the sticky note design built in within it. But Miro and Mural are virtual, limitless whiteboards. So for those of you who are in person with your colleagues, I'd recommend leave the tech at home. Don't worry about it. Go stand at a really big whiteboard in your conference room or in an office. And in your case, you would use sticky notes, maybe potentially like the super sticky notes so they don't fall off the whiteboard right away. But for those of you who are distributed, you could do this exercise by creating just a free board in Miro or Mural using the links that I've shared in the chat. The idea behind this visual creation of our grant calendar is that we want to start by laying out our absolute deadlines. And so this is work that you on your own could prepare so that you're ready for the conversation with your colleagues. To say, here are the upcoming 12 months, here are the things that we know for certain are going to happen. Maybe we make some estimates we make some notes about either like the dollar amount for it or how much effort we think it might take. So something that just real rough and large scale in its scale, we're thinking about meaningful data points that would help us understand. Or maybe we start with only the deadline. That's fine. So we lay out our 12 months. We know exactly what is due when as a bare minimum. But I don't want to just renew. I want to make sure that we're in good standing with all of our grant makers. And so in that case, I want you to now take a second color sticky note. So make another color in those virtual whiteboards. You grab a different color sticky if you're in your office, or if maybe you only have one color sticky, use a different color marker. But I want you to now note the deadlines for the reports, the things that your organization needs to submit in order to stay in good standing with your current grant makers. So your calendar, well, it might start to fill up at this point. But there's probably more that we want to place within our application. And so we want to think about our rolling deadlines. are there any grants that we are considering applying for in the next year that don't have a fixed one deadline for the year? Is it a grant maker that says, we review grant proposals quarterly, you can apply at any time? Or they don't even tell you they'll review quarterly, they just tell you that applications are accepted at any time. So I would encourage you to grab yet another color for the sticky notes, or again, if the same color sticky notes, grab a different colored marker to write on the sticky with and document those rolling deadlines and place them on your calendar by simply looking at which months seem to have space if I were counting sticky notes. So literally, in looking at the example on the screen, we see May, June, and July. Well, there were fewer total stickies in June and total fewer stickies in July. So I think maybe we could fit in some of those rolling deadlines in those months. Now, this doesn't mean we're done yet. It's time to take a look at the calendar and talk to our colleagues. You've done the prep work. Here's what we know. This is what must happen in terms of applications. Here's what must happen in terms of reports. Here's what we think could happen with some of the more flexible applications. And get your team to weigh in on what do they see in this calendar. Does it make sense to them? Is there potentially, maybe there's something that got left out? We really want to hear from them and see what questions they might have. Now, I'm going to show you how those questions can play out in just a moment, but let's assume that in this situation, the team says, oh, looks great. Okay, makes a lot of sense. We would get to move on to step 5, which is we're doing the work. The year is happening. It's underway. And then all of a sudden, just as is so prone to happen in the grant space, something unexpected opens. Now, this is a calendar showing summer months, so maybe it's something that opens unexpectedly late spring and it's due in the summer. Or maybe it's like what happened in New York State late this year to nonprofits of all shapes and sizes. In New York State, their online grant portal for state grant funding is about to be retired in January. And as a result, it seems like literally every state agency has been releasing last-minute, unexpected applications with due dates of mid to late December or potentially the very first week of January. They're trying to just get everything in that they possibly can before the new system changes. That created a lot of unexpected things for organizations to consider. So whatever the reason might be, probably, thankfully, not always related to grants gateway retirement, the reality is that our work, it is far from dull or boring, right? There are always things changing, and we need to be able to, as an organization, not simply say, oh, yep, we can apply for that too. Oh, yeah, sure, we can apply for this next one we didn't expect either. There's only so many hours in the day. Something has to give, or we risk burnout. If we're doing heroic things, working on the weekend, working on vacation, working 14-hour days to get grant applications done, burnout will come knocking on our door. There is no doubt about it. The research published in the Grant Professionals Association Journal highlights why our field is such a high burnout industry. So instead, when something comes up, we want to look at our whole calendar and start to play with the idea, what could we move? And this sticky note, whether virtual or physical, does promote different problem solving and different flexibility than when we see it only on a calendar or only in Excel. So what would be the first thing in this visual on the screen that we might move? We'd probably, if we had these big unexpected grants, we would probably move those rolling deadlines. We'll address those later this year so that we can have space for these unexpected yet high priority applications that our organization wants to focus on. Now, this still, even the way I have shown it on the screen, I think it still looks a little flat. So I want to show you what this really looks like when we do this with organizations. The prep work does fall to the grant writer, the grant professional like you or I. And so in this visualization, those yellow sticky notes represent all of the applications that are due. In this case, they're foundation grants. And those light blue sticky notes represent all the reports that are due. And the red, and I know you can't read the text for like what was the application and what's the real due date, but the red sticky notes, those represent government grants. So when those got laid out in this organization, this is what their calendar looked like. I'll give you a moment to let this sink in. Could you let me know in the chat box if anyone has any questions or concerns about what they see? Is there anything about the year that feels problematic to anyone? All right, very fast on the typing. Everyone is very concerned about December, as was the team that actually had this happen to them. Like, this is not a sustainable situation. Wow, all those reports, huh? Okay. So there's a few other things, though, that as the team talked through this exercise, there's some other things, though, that came out that I want to highlight before we start worrying just about December. Let's look at the fact that in that first visualization, all of the sticky notes were exactly the same size. I've been in the field a long time, and I say with pretty strong certainty that the average foundation grant is not as much effort as a state grant, and most state grants are not the same amount of effort as the average federal grant. Now, the scientific accuracy of that statement, oh, well, nope, not meant to be scientific, just based on experience. So what the team decided that before they worried about December, what they had to do was think about the relative scale of the work. Because on their calendar, they just looked like deadlines. But the reality was, they said, well, we think that the state grants are like 5 times as big as the foundation grants. And then we think the federal grants are probably twice as big as the state grants. And so they changed their sticky note size so that the relative scale was present. They also decided that before they played with December and made changes to their grant calendar, they wanted to do a few other things. They wanted to ensure that the paid time off for the lead grant professional was visible on the calendar so they knew that they were going to take some time away. And they said, what other grant team members are key that we want to be aware of their planned time off? So they had a pretty fun conversation, and actually let's have it here now. What is your favorite time of year to take paid time off? No right or wrong answer here. Hopefully it's one of the most fun questions you get to answer during your workday. What is your favorite time of year to take paid time off? For me, I'm still very tied to the school calendar, but I do love getting away from far, far upstate New York in February, whether it was tied to school break or not, because by then I'm kind of done with the snow and I need something warm. So for me, that February break is really important. And then I love something in the summer because that's, to me, the most beautiful time in the Thousand Islands. It's when it's warm and you want to be outside. So those are the 2 times of year that I really prioritize wanting to have time off. All right. December, we've got some folks who love it. Spring, great. There's no right or wrong answer. No, that's actually not true. There is a right answer. The right answer is that you put some paid time off on your calendar so that you are not filling your calendar so full of grant deadlines and commitments that you end up doing grant work, whether on the beach or hiking in the mountains or on a cruise or just on a staycation, reading books and hanging out with family and friends. Whatever the answer is, if you don't have that recharge time set aside in your grant calendar, I pretty much guarantee you'll fill it with deadlines instead. So we want that set aside is a placeholder for both you and maybe it's your key contact in finance and like your program leader. But that way we know we got to be careful as we lead up to that state grant or to that federal grant because we can see it's about to be Diane's vacation. The other thing to consider is if there are any large special events for your organization. In this representation, this sort of like tan-ish colored sticky note under November represented a large conference that the entire organization came together to help put on. So that was going to take capacity from all areas of the grant team, and therefore they wanted to make sure that they planned for that and saved space for it accordingly. Once this conversation was facilitated by the grant professional, so perhaps by you, now the team could talk about, okay, how can we address this differently? Are we still as worried about December? Yeah, I think we're still worried about December, but not as worried when we were looking at it in that very flat way where everything had the same relative effort. Here is a slightly different representation of that same conversation in a different organization. We played with their leadership. We took that experience of those year-end reports and we said, here, we'd like to have you practice. We wanted to build their muscles. This is how another team approached that same conversation. You see slightly different colors in places in terms of paid time off. This team in the exercise didn't think that there would be any large events like a conference or like a walk event, a gala. There was nothing that was going to take full team capacity, so they didn't document it there. And then in one more virtual exercise, we see different vacations. They had a little bit of fun with it. They added some pictures into their virtual piece. But what it does, the team took different approaches to it. This team they laid things out so that top to bottom, they were thinking about the order of when things were due in the month. So they were not just putting it all at the top thinking it was due at the month. But what was most important across all of these for the facilitated conversation is that they thought about the relative effort of the application work, not only, well, how many are we doing and when are they due? So pretty different concept for how we lay out our grant calendar. Part of this idea you're going to see laid out. This is why we gave you our grant research guidebook as one of your handouts. And I know that this is only one of the ways that your grant team can support you. But the reason that I make such a big deal out of this particular exercise, let's go back one slide. Pretend that now you're not the grant writer, the grant professional, but that you're the CFO who's going to help give all the grant information, or you're the vice president of programs who's responsible for reading the applications and approving the big things before they go in. Or fill in the blank for the other colleague who's going to help give meaningful information or approval. If they understand, wow, okay, I see those big federal grants. Yeah, those usually take me probably 20 hours worth of work as a contributor, not even the lead writer, or they take me 10 hours as a contributor, not a writer, whatever their answer might be. That's really helpful for me to think about because I know we're committed to doing these. And now I personally could plan to ensure that I'm not burned out leading our programs while still contributing to grant applications. So it helps you plan for your year for grant work. It helps those who you want to have contribute to plan for where are you really asking them in the year to contribute for grant work. And now, if something unexpected comes up, well, we're in December, so let's pretend that something opens later today. I'm hoping grants.gov folks aren't listening to me as I say this. Something opens today and it's due January 30th. We already can see how heavy December is. We can see that there are a few things of significance in January. Is anyone on the line worried about your capacity to do a new large federal grant based on what you see, given what is already happening in December and what is committed for in January? Go ahead, candid answer. It's fake, so it won't hurt anybody. Would you be concerned? Why for yes? N for no. If something opened today, would you be concerned if it was due at the end of January for a federal grant? Yeah, those are some pretty rapid. Yes, I'd be concerned, right? So you might say, oh, no, we've got the holidays, we've got all these commitments, can't do it. Oh, but it's one that has 2 deadlines this year? We could do their August deadline, or we could do their September deadline, or, if we knew that they opened every year and they're always due at January, what if we spent the year planning for that application? Not going after it in the next 45 days, but rather planning for it for the next deadline. So it helps make those discussions more vibrant, more interactive, and to help us come up with a variety of solutions that we might not have ever considered as a team. My biggest takeaway: sustainable grant seeking strategy that avoids burnout and stress for all involved. Okay, but let's think about other ways our grant team can be involved, because I went deep on grant calendars. Hopefully that idea is something that you can make your own, but let's think about those other ways that our colleagues can help us. So I do think that this might be sort of like that forehead slap, most obvious of the moments. You say, yes, I expect that some of these grant team colleagues, they're going to help provide information so that I can write grant applications. But then sometimes I do know my own writers on our team, they feel like perhaps they need to bring their superhero cape to work because they have heard everything possible about a program, but they're missing some key information, and they're wondering, how else can I gather this so I can finish writing the narrative, so I could finish writing this one response? And so one of the things that we find helpful for getting the best information out of our colleagues to help with our narrative is something called MSU. Now, MSU, I know we've got some Midwest folks here on the line. I'm not talking about Michigan State University. Nope. Rather, I'm talking about making stuff up. And by making stuff up, I don't mean Mad Lib style. Although that would certainly make for an interesting to read grant application. But Cheryl Kester, a dear colleague and friend, also the co-author of a book called Writing to Win Federal Grants, Cheryl talks about MSU, or making stuff up, in the sense of how we structure our draft before we ask for our colleagues' feedback. If we said broadly to our colleagues, maybe as a comment in a document margin, if we said, what grades and how many kids are we serving in this program? We've asked a whole bunch of complex things that might make the person go, oh, I don't have all those answers yet. So I won't reply yet because I don't know all the answers. But maybe you say, well, actually, I do know a little bit because I'm like 98% sure that we're serving junior high or middle school. I'm pretty sure it's 7th and 8th. And I don't know what we're going to name the project, and I don't know exactly how many kids we're going to serve, but I feel like as the grant writer, I could structure the sentence to say, we want to tell a reviewer in the upcoming school year, this project, which we haven't named yet, is going to serve some unknown number of students, and they're 7th and 8th graders. Well, now, what does the colleague see? Oh, actually, it's not 7th and 8th graders, dear grant writer. Thanks so much. It's actually going to be 5th, 6th, and 7th. And so, okay, great. We can change that. And it's going to be 150 per year. So they have something to react to without feeling like they have a blank piece of paper or a blank document or a blank comment that they are trying to reply to. You have given bite-sized nuggets where you're asking for input. So this is a very simplified version of the MSU idea, but you could use it in a logic model template. You could use it in a budget narrative. You could use it in your narrative responses. You could use it in like an objective statement that you're trying to write. But instead of giving blanks and asking for input, oh, just share some of your ideas with me. That feels really high pressure for these really well-intentioned grant team members. As specific and narrow as we can be in what we're asking for will increase the rate at which we get feedback and also the quality of the feedback that we receive. Now, speaking of logic models, so one of the things that would be really helpful if we think about the skills and the different passions and areas of expertise that we're asking for our grant team members to bring, as we're diversifying our grant team, we're looking for folks who have very unique skills related to some of our common grant elements. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your level of comfort building a logic model? No judgment here. 1, not comfortable. 10, I love building logic models. If you could let me know in the chat box, that would be appreciated. Scale of 1 to 10, what is your comfort level designing or building a logic model? Okay, already we're seeing a variety of answers in the chat box, and that's really common among people who are leading grant applications. But when we think about our colleagues who might be designing and implementing the programs we're asking for funding for, they have all sorts of expertise that's going to help us complete that awesome logic model. And some of them might say, oh, I love logic models. Yes, that'll be really fun. Those are the sort of folks you want to have on your grant team. Make that the key place that they contribute to your application. How about budgets? Show of hands, why for yes and for no? How many of you love working on grant budgets? I have both my hands up. I know you can't see them, but I love grant budgets. I'm a grant professional. I'm not the CFO. I love grant budgets and writing a budget narrative. I know that makes me unique, a little bit different, but I love them. And I think part of it's because that's what I read first when I'm a grant reviewer. But not everyone's like that. You're like, no, I really need to rely on the finance team. Like I'm thinking of another client team that we work with, and they're so large in terms of how many grants they have. They have 3 different people that help with their grants on pre-award and post-award. And if I didn't have the great support of Pierre and Eve and Carl, I mean, I'd be having fun because it would be really great to work on budget stuff. But their contribution saves so much time than that we can use for writing instead. So as we think about these key elements of applications, these are elements, logic model, work plan, and budget, that often look really different from one application to the next, but are going to be a great space, a very distinct space that we can ask our colleagues to contribute to. Related to that is certainly the writing of SMART objectives. So this is combining both our MSU idea and the logic model work plan budget for where in the application our colleagues are interacting. So if we write an objective statement and we think that maybe it's a little weak, or maybe we don't know the measurable component at all, laying out what we do know for our objective and then doing the MSU structure to try and get more information about what's measurable is a great place for then colleagues to weigh in. So for example, if I have an objective that I'm not real comfortable on the measurable piece with, if I am left wondering, as indicated by what, that's actually the prompt I will give. It's not necessarily the language I'm going to keep, but by saying as indicated by what, how will we know if this is reached? I'm going to get some different information from a colleague that then I can wordsmith into a SMART objective. If I gave a colleague on the grant team a blank work plan, their stress level, whether they're wearing a smartwatch or not, to track their stress level, I'm pretty confident their stress level is going to go up. Same thing if I gave them a blank logic model. Their stress level is going to go up. Maybe the CFO or grant management finance team, maybe their stress level might not go up if they got sent the federal budget form. That might be the only exception. But if I share a blank document with nothing entered, no context, those are things that are very likely to raise the stress levels for my team. So what can we populate? What do we already know? That's what I encourage you to do before you ask for their help. Now, because we do, as you can tell with our team today, we love interactive activities. And we think that the interactive activity for the grant calendar helps to create the buy-in necessary for folks to understand where and how they will be contributing during the year. So if you've taken the time to play with an interactive sticky note-based exercise with your team and they liked it, I do want to share this particular exercise as a way to have a little more fun with logic model and like work plan engagement as part of your application. Not all colleagues in your organization are going to love logic model design. There's a similar exercise related to laying out the steps of making like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But the one that our team really loves is around chocolate chip cookie baking. And so what this exercise is and what these little stickies represent are different elements that are going to get placed within the logic model. And so what we do is before we have the team start to build and fill out a logic model related to the program, we do as a warm-up exercise, we walk them through chocolate chip cookies so that we're getting their logic model muscles warmed up. We're giving them a shared experience, some shared language that they can use. So maybe we take 10, 15 minutes to warm up, and then we can dig in on the actual program or project logic model that we want to design. So I share that example as something quickly to help you think about what is in your toolbox and how can you make it so that getting the information you need for your application is less stressful, is a little easier, a little more effective, a little more efficient for your colleagues to be able to give you so that you can move on to that great writing work. We still have more ways our colleagues can contribute. Maybe it's not about the budget, maybe it's not about the logic model, but maybe it's about the colleagues who are analyzing your data or who might be conducting a focus group or conducting interviews with clients, with community members. And so thinking about the needs assessment processes, the ways that you are entering and analyzing your own data, your own interactions with your community, those interactions are going to help you ultimately in your needs statement section of your application. These are folks who maybe you only have to analyze things once or twice a year. Maybe you only do focus groups once a year at the end of a school year. Maybe you only do focus groups twice a year at the end of term. But where and how is this work being conducted, and how can those individuals doing the work share what they've learned with you so that you can use it year-round in applications? So I would say that's a really important space to think about how you could get engagement. And then the last of the 5 main areas that we've seen colleagues be really great contributors for a grant team, this is called a mock review. Some organizations might call it a peer review, a pre-submission review. The idea of this is that these are individuals in your organization who have not been a part of the application process up till this point. You're getting close to being done. You've not asked them to weigh in on narrative. You've not asked them to be part of the logic model process. You've not asked them to give you a bunch of budget information. But they could help you in one very important final way. So you're not asking them to edit. You want to make sure, of course, that you have a colleague who can give you a grammar edit, have a fierce red pen, and do some great suggested edits for you. But if you're doing a mock review, you are going to ask your colleagues who haven't helped read it, "Dear colleague, could I please ask for an hour of your time to read this full application and let us know how you would score it? Oh, look, using this small little form that I made for you, could you let me know how you would score it against the scoring rubric from the application, from the set of guidelines?" You might even ask 2 or 3 people in the organization to be mock reviewers for those really big, heavy state or federal applications. This is a great way to engage someone who wants to support grants, who wants to see them be successful, who wants to see the organization go after the big grants, but either doesn't have the capacity or for other reasons, the preference to be part of the process itself for the writing, but will get to now have a voice, but not just their opinion, a voice in the sense that they sit in the reviewer seat to help you think about how to get each and every final point out of an application before you click submit. So you're giving them the opportunity to sit in the reviewer seat before you click submit so that you can make some final edits and strengthen your application. So this mock review piece, it's not usually what we would offer to grant team member, or I should say potential grant team members. It's not what we offer first. We want to make sure we're getting content work done first. But we really want to see if this is somebody who wants to be involved. We haven't found anything else. Serving as a mock reviewer is another great thought. Oh, and a really great question then that's come in related to AI tools. Indeed, there's a lot to be learned from and to kind of play with as the AI tools are developing. There are some assistive writing tools that are coming up within fundraising and grant specific tools as well, not just the generalized chat GPT. There are also, I want to flag that the Association of Fundraising Professionals and the Grant Professionals Association have been releasing some ethical statements around AI. So if you're starting to play with the tools, I'd encourage you to pay attention to the field statements as well about that. But there is indeed some really supportive work that can happen. One of my favorites, actually not even around something as focused as like logic model or mock review, is when we get ourselves into really tight character counted spaces. There's a New York State grant thing right now, and you're like, you want me to answer that in what? 250 characters? Oh, well, if you put that in some of these tools and you ask it to character count, you might say, oh, I had not considered cutting it that way. Right? So there's some really powerful ways that you can use AI, but I do want to just flag, since it's been brought up, that I would encourage you to also pay attention to the statements that are being made by the ethics committees for both of those professional organizations that so many grant professionals belong to, because there's certainly there's lots of upsides, but there are also some concerns. So yep, happy to talk about it more offline. You'll have my contact information if you'd like to chat more about it off from here. So now, how do we facilitate this grant team? As we've been walking through our conversation today, there's a lot of different ways that we can engage our colleagues. And I think that for each and every one of you on the line, it will look just a little bit different, or maybe a lot different. So as we look at facilitating the grant team, you guessed it, more steps. So as we think about facilitating our grant team, the first thing I want to ask you to do is to confirm who is the facilitator and who are your members. So this was like when we talked earlier about building out our grant team. The reason I have this first step, including confirming a facilitator, is that it might not always be you. There might be times where, as in that healthcare example that I gave, that it would be best if it was the CEO or the vice president of programs who is facilitating a conversation. So it'll be organization specific for why you may or may not be the best facilitator for your organization in that moment. But we want to think about what is best for our organization. How can we have those big picture strategy conversations? And how can we have the do we apply for this or not questions in a fast-paced environment so that we're not letting the deadline clock keep ticking? Just had an example with an organization the other day. They've had some staff transition in both their finance team and their program team, but they have the same executive director. And she's done a beautiful job of growing this organization over the years. But what her new finance staff was asking a lot of questions around was, you have a lot of designated grants. What if the strategy was less about securing more designated grants that sort of keep you like plugging in here and there, and what can we fund and what isn't funded? And what if instead the strategy this year was to start like to maintain what we have, but to start building unrestricted funds, things that give us more flexibility. So, new member to the grant team produced some great questions that for this organization might start to shift their annual grant strategy. And so I bring that up because when the members change, even if you've had the same facilitator and the same leader, you might start to see some shifts in the conversation as well. So I think that's a great thing to highlight as well. Now let's ensure that whether we have the same players as we've been engaged with for a while, or like in that last example, we have some new players, let's ensure that we have talked about how do we communicate? What tools do we use? So for example, it's that we use Drive for all of our working drafts, and our primary team communication is our grant team channel in Slack or in Teams, and email would be secondary if we were going to communicate. We don't use personal text, right? I'm just making up some of the expectations that we might choose to set. We could also then set some expectations. We're going to set meetings for every 3 weeks or every 5 weeks. When we're in a big federal application, we're going to meet once a week for 15 or 20 minutes. When we ask for feedback, we're going to give everybody at least 48 hours to reply. I'm just throwing out some boundaries for consideration, but these are the sort of things that if we set expectations up front for what we want to uphold for each other, we've got a bit of it, we call it a team working agreement, is one of the things that you'll hear it called within Agile project management. But now folks understand what are the rules by which we're playing as we're working on our activities together. Now, if you haven't caught on, and this might not have been as apparent in any of our previous webinars together on grants this year, our team is highly focused on making work visible. This is truly a photo of a whiteboard. This is a rolling whiteboard in my very own office. That's my arm sticking into the picture. Remember how I talked about super sticky notes? Yeah, those little dots on all of those stickies is because those are magnets holding those stickies onto the board, because it turns out those were not super sticky notes, and some of them were falling to the floor. Hard to remember what your visible work looked like, right? But in whatever way you are making your grant work clickable, like as few clicks as possible, I should say, right? How fast can we click into it? How visible is our plan, our calendar? What is it we want to change and shift together? So whether you're thinking sticky note style now, digital or in person, whether you're thinking about how you've structured your folders, or if you make a project digest, making your work visible to your colleagues, making it accessible. Again, we're trying to take that stress out of the grant work for our colleagues. They're passionate about their line of work, and they might accept that grants are important for their work to continue, but grants might not be their personal or professional passion or choice the way that it may be for some of us. I know that when I walk into a room and I say, I love grants, I even do like the heart symbol, right? Oh, like, I love grants. Folks will make a face in the room. Not all the folks, but some of the folks will make a face. I'll say, oh, you've had some stressful grant experiences, haven't you? And so doing these small things, setting expectations, making work visible, thinking about how we facilitate, what that does is it takes away some of the yuck that could happen in a grant situation, having nothing to do with the writing and the deadlines and the awards or not, but just the process and the pressure and the timelines that we face. And instead, what it gives us space for is doing really good work together and celebrating the good work along the way. So this particular infographic here, this is from Sylvia Duckworth, this particular visual representation of the iceberg illusion. I love it when we think about grants, because what is the success that people see above the surface? They see grant dollars. They see grant awards. That is what is considered the visible success of all this hard work we're talking about today. But what's below it? What's below it is building new relationships. What's building it is taking time to build a logic model draft together. What's below it is having a visible grant calendar that we've agreed upon and worked on together. What's below it are these facilitated grant team conversations. What's below it is taking some time to create the MSU, the making stuff up structure in an objective section so that your colleagues can provide their feedback quickly and in a meaningful way. Those are all the things that are below the surface when we think about what do people see related to grants versus what is really happening. Is there anything else that anybody wants to call out? I gave a list, but certainly not all the list, related to what's below the surface, the things that make your grant seeking work successful that people don't necessarily see. I'd love to give you recognition for that in the chat box. So if you could, what else do you see or you experience related to grants that is below the surface, not what people are seeing? Maybe it's that people don't see how we learn from, how we grow from a rejection. I will just make this assumption on behalf of everyone here today. I don't think any of us like when a grant we spent time and effort on gets rejected. How do we learn from that? How do we grow from that? Well, our team at DH Leonard Consulting, we do have a playlist on Spotify. If you want me to send you the link, happy to. It's just one where we add songs. What are songs that motivate us? And I told you, like, we got an award today, but on Friday we got a disappointing rejection notice through a client. It was, what a sad way to end the week. But this morning on my Peloton ride, I happened to hear Taylor Swift's Shake It Off. And I was like, that's got a good set of lyrics in there. They're chorus lines of Shake It Off. I said, we're going to learn from this. We're going to debrief on it, but we're then going to shake it off because we've got to move on and focus on their next great grant application. Well, so that's not celebrating a rejection. But what it is doing is setting the stage for how do we pay attention to all the little things related to our iceberg and learn from and grow for those hard things we're doing, but also celebrate literally all those under the surface things. Our team has a yellow dingy bell. It's like the bell you would ring like at a service counter. It's yellow and it has a smiley face. And every single one of our distributed team members has one. And when something small but great happens, we all ring it on Zoom when we're together. We use emojis in Slack to express our celebration. We do everything we can to find reasons to celebrate and to cheer each other on along the way, and not just within our team of writers, but across our clients. They have yellow dingy bells. They see the emojis back in messages as well. They see on the agenda when we start that we start by celebrating not just awards, but all the important, meaningful little tidbits that have gotten us since the last meeting to where we are today. So I encourage you to think about how can you celebrate with your team? And it's on purpose that I end there by talking about celebration, because the rest of today, we were talking about nitty gritty. What would it be like to facilitate a grant calendar? What would it be like to pull a team together? And that's all very important. But if there's one thing that you take from today to try, I would ask you to celebrate the small things with your team more related to grants and all the grant-related activity than you currently do. With that, I'm wondering what big picture questions might you have about today's conversation, or little picture questions. Questions of all shapes and sizes are welcome. You can type them into the chat box for me if you'd like now. You are also welcome at any time after any of the sessions I deliver here. You can always email me directly and our team will get back with you. Diane at dhleonardconsulting.com. Happy to answer questions at any time. If you say, maybe not email, have enough, that's okay. We've got lots of different social networks that we're present on as well. You can ask questions there using the DM feature if you'd prefer, or comments on a post. Whatever is your choice for where you want to ask questions is where we are happy to answer. So you've got a lot of different options. Okay, I'm not seeing extra questions getting typed into the chat box right now, but I know that many of you could be like me. I don't have questions until I'm going to do the work later. So if you're in Miro or you're in Mural, you're playing with the grant research guidebook and thinking about what that means for your grant team, by all means, please reach out and ask questions. We're here and happy to help. Now, with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining me for this 90-minute conversation. I hope that you've come up with some different things that you want to try within your organization related to your grant teams.
Thank you so much, Diane. I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. If anybody has questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. Diane's email is also in the chat box if anybody would like to email her any questions. I've launched the survey already, and I just want to give a special thank you to Diane for an incredible webinar. The webinar is recorded and will be posted. The feedback greatly helps Diane let her know what you guys like, what you guys would like to see next time, anything that you would like her to discuss in the future. Please let us know what you think about today's webinar. It is greatly appreciated. We also appreciate you joining today's webinar. I know it was an early one, so thank you for everyone for joining us. Our next webinar is going to be December 13th, Stronger Tomorrow, Enhancing Public Safety and Suppressing Substance Abuse in Indian Country Communities, presented by William Latchford. As always, registration is free. Please feel free to register. It will be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. Like I said before, this webinar is recorded and will be posted onto our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com. It will be posted under the Kitila recorded webinar tab. If you have any questions or are unable to find the recording link, please send me an email and I'd be more than happy to send you the direct link. Please check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We post everything on there, so go ahead and check out all of our Instagram and Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. As always, we also have our Hope and Thing a Native American podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Diane. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.